When it comes to good character introductions, pretty much anything goes. There's no real template. Great characters can be introduced in seemingly mundane ways. In Pulp Fiction, for instance, we meet Vincent Jules in the middle of this random conversation.
You know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
They don't call it a quarter pounder with cheese?
Oh man, they got the metric system. They wouldn't know what the fuck a quarter pounder is.
In Whisper of the Heart, we meet Shizuku as she's walking out of a store. That's it. We follow her home, and the story goes from there.
Good evening. Oh, hi, Shizuku.
In Saving Private Ryan, when they finally find Private Ryan, which the whole movie has been building up to, it's kind of downplayed.
Ryan first to 506.
KFC told him to be third in 506.
James Francis, Ryan?
Yes, sir. How'd you guess that?
Which is a lot more effective than if it came with an extreme close-up and a burst of trumpets. By contrast, introductions that call a lot of attention to themselves are not always necessary and can even be detrimental to a story. But they are a lot of fun, and they can serve a narrative purpose too. Some of my favorites include Eve's introduction in WALL-E. Prior to this, WALL-E's life consisted of the same routine day after day and took place in almost complete solitude. The introduction of Eve calls a lot of attention to itself, but deservedly so, because her arrival changes the story. Another intro I've always loved is from Desperado, which is not a great movie, but come on, how do you not love this? The lighting, the voiceover that hypes up the character before we meet him.
Just when you thought his face was about to be revealed, it wasn't. It was as if the lights dimmed, just for him.
Another standout for me is Paulie in Goodfellas, where all these hardened gangsters instantly freeze when he appears. The scene would work well on its own, but again, the voiceover makes it so much better.
Paulie might have moved slow, but it was only because Paulie didn't have to move for anybody.
A Clockwork Orange also uses voiceover to great effect, except here it's not one character introducing another, but rather Alex introducing himself as he dramatically breaks the fourth plane.
There was me. That is Alex, and my 3 droogs.
I've mentioned before how much I love the introduction of Vickers in Prometheus. She may not be a great character herself, she's actually completely unnecessary, but this is still a great introduction. Everyone else comes out of cryosleep weak and puking, but when we see Vickers, she's cranking out push-ups like a total badass. It's a great example of action speaking louder than words. If only the whole movie was as good as this intro, which I can honestly say about the introduction of Ilsa in Casablanca. It doesn't get much better than this. The close-up on Ingrid Bergman, the stunned reaction of Humphrey Bogart, and of course his iconic line.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
The point I'm trying to make is there's no right way to introduce a character. It always depends on the character and on the story they're in.
He's looking at you, kid.
And yet, with all else being equal, if I was forced to choose the most effective kind of introduction, I'd have to say it's when the intro itself tells its own little story about the character that's being introduced. And with that as our criteria, I can think of no better intro than that of Villanelle from Killing Eve.
No!
You know the Myers-Briggs test? It's supposed to tell you the sort of person you are so that you can then choose a career that suits your personality. I'm guessing if Villanelle took that test, it would suggest she become a professional assassin because it suits her personality perfectly.
Why are you doing this to me?
I have absolutely no idea.
Killing people doesn't bother her. In fact, she enjoys it. Not just the killing part, but the causing pain and fear prior to death as well. Villanelle is not a good person. She views other people as pawns to play with, to use to her benefit, and to ultimately discard. That description might remind you a little of another fictional psychopath, Hannibal Lecter, who has a pretty great introduction himself.
Jack Crawford sent a trainee to me.
But while Hannibal and Villanelle are both violent lunatics, there's an important distinction between them. Whereas Hannibal seems to possess complete mastery over his emotions or lack thereof, Villanelle isn't like that. She's quick to anger, she throws temper tantrums, she's easily offended, she's quite petty, she often acts like a child, and yet despite all that, she's also highly intelligent. She knows how to appear normal, how to blend in, and how to manipulate people into doing what she wants. I love this scene where Villanelle and the title character Eve finally meet face to face, and Villanelle tries to manipulate Eve into thinking of her in a way that isn't really true.
I don't want to hurt people. They make me do it. If I don't do what they say, Eve, I have nowhere to go.
Most people would probably fall for this, but Eve instantly sees through it.
Bullshit. You're an asshole.
She's one of the few people that Villanelle cannot easily string along, which only intensifies the bizarre cat-and-mouse relationship / rivalry / obsession that develops between these two women and that serves as the heart of the story. Alright, so put your writing cap on. How would you introduce this kind of character? A highly intelligent, horrifically violent, psychopathic hitman who's skilled at mimicry and manipulation, but is also childish and petty. Would you just jump right to her killing someone, or would you go for something more subtle? That was the challenge facing Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who wrote all the episodes for Killing Eve, which she also did for her brilliant show Fleabag.
Okay. I'm sorry, that kind of thing won't get you very far here anymore.
Oh no, sorry. I thought I had a top on underneath.
But whereas Fleabag was Waller-Bridge's own creation, Killing Eve is based on a series of stories by Luke Jennings, which I read after watching the show and thought were pretty good. I'm going to assume Waller-Bridge read those stories as well, since the basic premise and many of the characters are the same. So she would have known that Jennings introduced Villanelle in a Parisian cafe, where she's being eyed by this young couple who are interested in having a tryst, I believe is the term, with her. Villanelle quickly realizes this, but doesn't let on that she knows. She thinks to herself that she's going to enjoy manipulating them. They start talking, Villanelle starts to deceive them, but before anything can happen, she gets a text from her handler Constantine and immediately takes off. As far as introductions go, this gets a lot right. I don't know if I'd make an entire video about it, but it's definitely entertaining and informative. We learn that Villanelle is smart, confident, deceptive, manipulative, in possession of an incredible memory, unapologetically sexual, and dead serious when it comes to her job. One minor knock against this is that Jennings provides a lot of information by telling us, which mostly works here, but wouldn't on screen, at least not without a narrator, which Killing Eve doesn't have. To address this, Waller-Bridge stuck with Jennings' concept of introducing Villanelle by having her interact with people who have no idea who or what she is, but she made some key alterations. Instead of a cafe, we begin in an ice cream shop. There are several people inside, but our focus is on 3. The first is Villanelle, but unlike the book, which starts with a bunch of mobsters saying they need to hire an assassin and then cutting to Villanelle, this is the very first scene of the show, so unless you read the book, you don't know that Villanelle is an assassin. You don't know that she's a psychopath. You don't know that she's in disguise, that she's here on a job. You don't even know that her name is Villanelle. All you know is she's a stylish young woman eating ice cream. At a separate table, there's a little girl also enjoying ice cream, and the shop's vendor is standing behind the counter. Now, what I'm about to describe may seem a little anticlimactic, seeing as how I've built it up so much, but bear with me. Okay, so Villanelle looks at the girl, and the little girl looks back. Villanelle smiles at the girl, but the girl doesn't smile back. Instead, she looks away, sees something she likes, and then smiles. Curious about this, Villanelle looks where the girl is looking, and sees it's the vendor who's smiling back at the girl, but unlike Villanelle's half-hearted grin, he's giving a big toothy smile. After observing this, Villanelle waits for the girl to look back at her, and when she does, she gives her own toothy smile, and this time the girl smiles back. Satisfied, Villanelle gets up to leave, and on her way out, she knocks the girl's ice cream into her lap. I know it doesn't sound like much, but before you tell me how unimpressed you are, consider how well this introduction performs 3 critical functions. First, it tells a self-contained story. Seriously, stories don't need to be big and complicated. All a story needs is a protagonist, an antagonist, a conflict, and a resolution, which Villanelle's introduction has. It has a protagonist, obviously. It has a conflict. Villanelle smiles at the girl, but the girl doesn't smile back. It has an antagonist, the little girl. She may not look like Thanos, but she doesn't have to. All that's required of her is she stand in the way of the protagonist getting what she wants. The intro then has rising action in the form of Villanelle copying the vendor's smile, and it has a climax where the protagonist either succeeds or fails. Now, the intro actually could have ended here and would have worked pretty well, yet this story has a denouement, or denouement as I used to call it, which has a somewhat arbitrary definition. Whereas the resolution is how the conflict of the story is resolved, the denouement is how the story actually actually ends. Not all denouements are created equal, and this one is absolutely vital. So the intro tells a complete story, but that's not all it does. It also tells us who the character it's introducing is, which foreshadows everything she'll go on to do. Again, the book's introduction did this as well. We learned that Villanelle has these attributes. But while the screen version failed to tell us that Villanelle's cover story is she's a currency trader or that she deflects when given an order from Constantine, it more than makes up for it. Though we've only just met this woman, in only a few seconds it's clear that something is very off about her. She's not reacting to being looked at by a child the way most of us would. And the child seems to sense that something is off as well, which is why she's not smiling. Villanelle seems to take the child staring at her as a challenge, and being confident, she doesn't shy away. Instead, she puts down her spoon, gives the child her full attention, and then grins at her. In doing so, we learn that she's deceptive. We somehow sense that this is not who she really is. It's a performance. And in many ways, Villanelle is a performer. She presents a front to the outside world. That's really the challenge that this girl presents. It's not about getting her to smile just for the hell of it, it's about getting her to believe Villanelle's performance. It's like her professional integrity has been questioned. So she watches the child. She notes how the vendor gets her to smile, and then she copies him. In doing so, we learn that she's observant, that she's a skilled mimic, and that she's persistent. When she doesn't succeed initially, she finds another way. And then after getting the child to smile, we learn that she's petty. This girl did nothing wrong. If a complete stranger grins at you, you're under no obligation to grin back, yet her lack of a response is still enough for Villanelle to take offense. These generalized attributes are great to learn early on because they represent real personality building blocks, and unlike the book, which again tells us most of this, the screen version shows us. This scene has no dialogue, so the information we learn isn't just handed to us like it is in the book. We have to go get it, which makes us active participants in the story. We're essentially telling the story to ourselves. And that brings me to the final reason I consider this such a great introduction, which is that everything that happens during it matters. I made a video a while ago about blue is the warmest color, which I said you could cut an hour out of without actually changing. While I may have been exaggerating a little, I still think you could cut quite a bit without actually altering the story because there's just so much redundancy. This introduction, however, isn't like that. It only contains what's essential. To show you what I mean, let's see if we can remove anything from the intro without fundamentally changing it or making it worse. We'll start at the beginning with Villanelle initially smiling at the girl. Is there any way we could get rid of this? Of course not. If Villanelle doesn't try to get the girl to smile, then none of this other stuff matters. Same thing with the girl not smiling back. If she immediately returned this grin, then none of this other stuff would be necessary. So these two have to stay. But what about after that? What if after the girl didn't smile back, Villanelle just got up and knocked her ice cream over? That would tell a complete story with a protagonist, an antagonist, a conflict, and a resolution. So it would satisfy our first criteria, but it wouldn't meet our second. This wouldn't tell us who Villanelle is. For instance, it wouldn't show us that she's persistent. If anything, it makes it look like she's quick to give up. So we need more than just this. But what about the vendor? Do we need him specifically? Villanelle, after all, could certainly figure out how to smile bigger on her own, and then the rest of the intro could play out the same way. We'd still have a complete story, and this time we would learn that Villanelle is persistent. However, we'd still have the same problem. Without the vendor, we wouldn't learn that Villanelle is observant, or that she's a skilled mimic. So we gotta keep him as well. That brings us back to the little girl. What if after Villanelle tried a second time to get the girl to smile, it still didn't work, so she got angry and then knocked the girl's ice cream over? That would tell a complete story, and this time we would learn that she's persistent and observant. But it would still misrepresent who she is. Villanelle is good at manipulating people, meaning she should be able to get a child to smile. So this has to stay. And finally, we're back to the denouement. Denouement. We could simply conclude the intro with Villanelle getting the girl to smile. That would give us our self-contained tale, and in it we'd learn all this information about the character being introduced. It's just about perfect. Except for one minor flaw. It doesn't tell us why Villanelle is trying to get the girl to smile in the first place. She's not doing this out of the goodness of her heart. She's a violent psychopath. This girl could die in front of her and Villanelle would not care. She's doing this because she enjoys manipulating people. Without this final element, we might get the impression that Villanelle is a good person, which she isn't. We also wouldn't learn that Villanelle is petty, which is vital information. So in addition to telling a complete story that more than adequately captures captures the essence of the character it's introducing, this intro does so in such a reductive rather than redundant way that it resists any form of revision. It is literally unimprovable. If that doesn't earn a spot in the pantheon of greatest character intros ever, then I don't know what does.